Alright, Lesson 5, Vehicle Inspection, Maintenance, and Repair. We're going to go through this fairly quickly, and then hopefully in the class we'll get a moment or a time to be able to go outside and look at the ambulance and kind of go through a checkoff. So I want you to understand that you can be held legally liable or responsible for things going wrong with your ambulance that were known about or easily preventable. So if you knew the brakes were squealing terribly and making all sorts of grinding noises and you never reported it and then your brakes failed, you could be held liable for that. So the quick and easy thing to do, of course, is inspect your ambulance, and if you find something wrong, to report it and document it. That way your supervisor or the ambulance service becomes liable and not you. So how do we make sure our ambulance is in good condition? That's easy. Inspect it. So we have to visually inspect it. Now, if we had found something wrong in the past and they had sent it off for it to be repaired, make sure when it comes back that the repairs have been made. Sometimes they have to wait on a part or something special to come in, so instead of paying the fee for storing it at the maintenance shop, they bring it back to the parking lot at the ambulance bay and just leave it there. And you don't want to just hop in the ambulance sitting out there in the parking lot without first knowing if it was fixed or not. And the other thing that comes up once in a while is scheduled maintenance. So every so many thousand miles you have to have your oil changed. Same thing with ambulances. So make sure that you keep up with the mileage, and when you're getting closer to those scheduled things, that gets done. So we kind of do a quick check on all these things. We turn the engine on, make sure it runs, make sure we don't overheat, our brakes are working, we have power to everything. And this is kind of funny because, if it's running a little rough, we'll deal with that. If it's overheating a little bit, it's okay. It's not my engine. I'll deal with that. If it takes me a little bit extra to brake, that's okay. If I don't have lights that work, you know what? We'll figure something out. But oh my goodness, if heaven forbid the air conditioner goes out, I'm out of that ambulance right now. I want a new one. Get me a replacement. That's got to be fixed. I just can't get hot in the ambulance. We'll take an ambulance out of service for air conditioner heat not working a whole lot faster than anything else. Just kind of funny how we think. So when we inspect our vehicle, we're hopefully going to find everything's okay, and most of the time we do. But if it's not, then we have to document it so we can track it and see what was fixed, what still needs to be fixed, and just to see if we're having routine problems with an ambulance. If you're burning through brakes every 10,000 miles, there might be something somebody's doing incorrectly, either on the maintenance side of things or somebody needs to learn how to drive. So here's what NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, kind of recommends. And really, you're going to do this every shift. So even if you're only running 1 or 2 calls a week, every time you come on to shift, you're going to check your truck to make sure it looks okay. Now, the full check is something that's usually done by a maintenance supervisor, and that's much more detailed than the quick check. We do the quick check thing. And that's just hitting the highlights, popping the hood, looking for all the fluids, and make sure your lights are working, the siren's working, brakes are working, all that stuff. And this is the one that's in your the EVOC participant manual. It kind of looks like this, a sample checklist. Again, every service is going to have their own, so this may or may not look like this when you get to work. But normally you have a place you have to put the unit number, the station that you're at, of course the date, not always the time, but the date, and then of course to identify the ambulance and how many miles that are on it. And this is just sort of a way we go about checking our ambulance, the same way every time, kind of like patient assessment. That way you don't miss anything. So this is just things that you're looking for, and then if they're appropriate or not, what you're checking with, and then if it's okay or if there's a problem. If there's a problem, did you do a work request to have it fixed? And then your supervisors will have to initial it when it was fixed. So a couple of examples here. Let's say you had a cracked turn signal lens and a slow oil leak. Now they don't tell me what slow means. Is it like drip, 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 or is it drip and then like an hour later there's another drip? You notice a pancake size puddle on the ground after it's been sitting there all night. Something like that I'd probably run with. I would be okay with doing that. Just keep an eye on your oil level. And even the cracked turn signal lens I'm okay with. It's not something that we keep stored at the station where I could get it fixed easily. Maybe a light bulb I could change out, but the turn signal lens we'd probably have to order. And the reason I would probably still run in this is if you're swapping ambulances, everything in the back of one ambulance has to go into another. So all the 4x4s and oxygen masks and then the oxygen and everything just has to get transferred over. And that's a lot of work to move it all from one ambulance to another. Now this guy with the broken windshield wiper was pretty creative, a little splinting there to make it work. I guess if that works, go for it. But I'd probably take that one out of service sooner than I would the cracked turn signal lens, because you just never know what you're going to run into in a day. If you're going to get stuff on your windshield, you need to clean it off. I like to think I'm pretty darn quick, but every time I put my foot on the brakes to see if the brake lights turn on, and then I hop out and run around to the back of the ambulance, they're always off. I don't get that. So I have to have a partner check them. There was one station I worked at that actually had mirrors in the bay, so you could check them on your own by looking at your side view mirrors and the rear view mirrors and mirrors in the back of the bay. But that was only one place I worked. We don't use the wheel chocks very much. The fire department probably uses it more for their apparatus than we do for ambulances. But if you're on a hill or something, you may want to put some in there so your ambulance doesn't roll away. And then, of course, grab a blank checklist, and you and your partner head out. And generally, one of you is checking the inside of the ambulance in the back, going through all the equipment and making sure you have enough oxygen and the medications and enough supplies and all that. And the other person's checking the ambulance to see if it's working. So this is the overall sequence. We just kind of start with standing back and looking at it, and then we work our way around it in a very systematic way every time. So check cleanliness. Most ambulance services, it's policy that you wash it at the beginning or end of every shift. I've worked with places where they've done it both ways. It's actually kind of nice to do it at the end of the shift because you're already kind of dirty and nasty, and then get out there and get wet and dirty and nastier. It's just not as much fun to do at the beginning of the shift, get all sweaty. But at the sitting level, do you see any leaking from it? Do you see any body damage? And I want to mention one thing about this body damage. Some places you work, you're responsible for it. So if you back into something and you dent a bumper, you're going to end up paying for the deductible. So you don't want the crew the shift before back into something, leave a dent in it. You don't report it, and then they blame it on you. And I know that has happened at services. Unfortunately, I was never involved in something like that, but just document damage. When we open up the front of the ambulance, we just want to, take a look at everything. If there's a log of some sort, some people or some services kind of keep a clipboard of all the calls that you run. And speaking of clipboards, you want to make sure you have enough patient care reports and things in your clipboard. You want to make sure all the stuff up there is secured some way, your radios and handhelds and all that. They're not just flying around in case you do wreck. And then something we used to do in days gone by, and I suspect they still do some, is in the middle of the night you drive over to Station 4 or something and turn on all the lights and sirens on the radio and put everything on full blast. So when they get their call in the middle of the night and they come stumbling out to their ambulance half asleep and they turn on the ignition, everything turns on full blast, and it scares the poop out of them. And it's always kind of funny to do to each other. We play a lot of jokes on each other. So before that happens to you, make sure everything's turned off. Adjust your seat, adjust the mirrors. Here is something where you may need a partner to adjust the mirrors. We're finally getting powered mirrors in ambulances. Finally. It's only been, 50 years, but we're finally getting them. Pop the hood, turn the key on, check the fuel gauge. If an ambulance ever gets below 3/4 of a tank of fuel, we go fill it up. I know that seems like we go often if you're only getting down to 3/4, but the idea is that you're kind of ready for anything, because you may have a shift where you get call after call after call after call, and you just don't get a chance to run and get fuel. Then we hop out and we kind of look at the front side, check the tire, check the fenders, make sure everything looks okay, no body damage. Then we come around to the front, make sure all of our lights are working, the emergency equipment's working, headlights, all that stuff. We'll pop the hood, check under the hood. If your belt looks like the one here in the picture, you probably need to take your ambulance out of service. We generally can check fluid levels like oil level and power steering and coolant levels, and if anything's low, go ahead and replace that, and then make sure that the hood closes and latches. Then we come around to the passenger side, check the tire and the fender, and go down that side. Ambulance looking for any damage or any problems. This would be a problem if you saw that as your tire. You might need to put a new one in. And that's actually one thing that most ambulances, we don't carry a spare tire, and we're not authorized to replace the tires. So you'll have to call your supervisor, or have to get somebody over there official to change out the tires. And then we look at the back, look in the patient compartment area, make sure everything's looking okay. It's always fun to open the doors, look in there, and say, hey, what's that piece of equipment? Where did that get there? So see if there's anything new that you need to get in surfaced on. And again, make sure everything is latched down, secured down, cabinets are closed. Your monitor, which usually is sitting on a shelf, has a bracket or something to secure it so it doesn't go flying. Those things are 30, 40 pounds, and that would hurt your partner or the patient if it landed on them. And then step back and look at the lights and the condition of the ambulance, see if there's any damage. And then on the driver's side, and get back up front, and then we start up the ambulance, pull it forward, pull it back, do a radio check, make sure the emergency lights are working, make sure the siren's working, and you're good to go. Now this full check is done not as often, but it's a much more systematic investigation of the ambulance, inspection of the ambulance, and that's usually done by a maintenance supervisor who knows a little bit more about them. So we do the quick check, we'll make sure the full checks get done, and then if there's something you're allowed to fix, which isn't much nowadays, we like to have the certified mechanics do it. That way if something goes wrong, it's their liability and not ours. Not that you don't know how to change the oil or change a belt or put a starter in or rebuild a transmission, whatever you know how to do, that's great, but just don't do it on your ambulance, because that's a different liability. So, and if you don't inspect your ambulance, or if you don't fix something that you know is broken, or at least if you don't report it when you know it's broken, you can be held liable if you are operating what you know to be an unsafe vehicle. Now, fortunately, OSHA says we don't have to do anything that's not safe, so we don't have to knowingly operate a vehicle that is not safe. If you think it's unsafe, they have to find another one for you. Now, if there aren't any other ones, you might get sent home, but usually we have a couple of spares. So we need to know that it's been inspected, which you're going to do. You need to know that scheduled maintenance has been done, and then if it had a repair to be made, that it was sent off, fixed, and came back, and the repairs were all done. And usually there's a ticket that goes with that, and that thing goes in a big 3-ring binder where everything, all the inspections and all the maintenance and all the work orders and everything about that ambulance is stored. So how do we know if it's safe? We inspect it. Now, the comprehensive maintenance program, you have one scheduled for your vehicle, your personal car, a personal vehicle, and the idea is that if we do routine maintenance on these things and have the official mechanics look at it, hopefully we can find little things and fix them before they become big things. So the inspections that we do, the scheduled maintenance that gets done, and keeping all this stuff documented helps to hopefully prevent some sort of catastrophic failure of your ambulance. So you probably have something that looks like this schedule, which every 5,000, 15,000, 10,000, whatever, every 3,000, something gets done. I think most of them are on about a 5,000 mile cycle now. Same thing for your ambulance, though. They have the same sort of maintenance schedule. So you're responsible for making repairs that you can, which is probably something very simple like changing out a light bulb. If you can't make it or not authorized to make it, then when it gets sent off, make sure that it's working, inspect it, and check it, and document it. And if you find something wrong, document what's wrong with it and report it to your supervisor. Now, a work request, if something is wrong, again, you need to document it. So there's usually another form, I know, more paperwork, that has to be filled out, just sort of describing what the problem is and who you reported it to, and then they come up with a plan to treat it or to take care of it and send it off to be fixed. And then when it gets fixed, it gets signed off on by your supervisor. So the maintenance log is that binder that's kept in usually the supervisor's office, and they have like a big 3-ring binder with everything that's ever been reported about that ambulance. So all of our inspections and maintenance and routine maintenance and anything else, it all gets documented and stored there. So, again, inspect your ambulance. If it has been broken, make sure it comes back and that you make sure it's working properly, and then you can put it in service. What happens when things go wrong? Because sometimes they do. So the first thing you probably will need to do is contact dispatch and your supervisor on your radio. So use your communication equipment. And then as you're looking at the repair, you really need to think about how bad your patient is, how serious of a condition they're in, how close is another ambulance. Is it something you can fix and fix quickly? And if not, can you keep the ambulance going to keep the electrical equipment going? Because sometimes we have pumps and oxygen and ventilators and all that stuff going in the back. Because of the risks that we have, almost everything has a battery. Sometimes we have to switch from our main to a battery, so things like suction. We have a handheld one, we have a battery one, and we have the one that works off of the ambulance. So we actually have three. That's a lot of redundancy, but it's kind of critical in airway issues. So you'll see that we have oftentimes have a manual way of doing things if the electricity fails. So a couple of examples. Just loaded a stable patient into your ambulance, and you're a few miles from where backup is, and you notice you got a flat tire. So what do we think through as we go through this? First of all, contact dispatch, and then you have to think, geez, do I have a stable or unstable patient? How critical is this patient? And the patient, according to the scenario, is stable. So there's not a huge rush at this point, which is good. You can take a breath. Do you think you could fix a tire quickly? Do you know where the spare tire is in an ambulance? Because there probably isn't one, which means you have to wait for a wrecker to get there to fix it. So it'd probably be better to call for backup at that point and have them come to your scene, and then you just transfer them from one ambulance to the other. I've been there, I've done that, that's the way it happens. Now, this one's different because we have a critical patient, and we're still a few miles from where backup is, and I noticed that my engine is overheating. And they're on some sort of life support. So I hate it for my ambulance, but this might be a time where I would, first of all, contact dispatch and let them know and start a backup towards my location. But because they're critical and they're on life support, I have to keep my ambulance running. So if I'm doing that, I'm probably going to keep going towards the hospital. I may blow an engine, but it's better to blow the engine or risk blowing the engine and help your patient than to let your patient die. So those are the things that you need to think through as you're doing this. Any questions? Just let me know. Thanks.